I don't really know how to start shows.
Come on now, don't start liking me now.
So yeah, I'm funny compared to, well, you'll see later. I stand for mayhem!
I know a lot of fucking idiots who think a lot of shit is mean-spirited just because it goes against what they believe. But the relief of comedy is to take things that aren't funny and it allows us to laugh about them for an hour.
We got a purple suit to buy and a gigantic coffin.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. Today, not in the Vaulted Podcast Studios, but over StreamYard. Hopefully, the gang will be back together soon. But for now, I am pleased to introduce to you the great Louis C.K. Yes, finally, we're doing Louis. Very exciting. As you guys probably know, one of my favorites of all time. But before we get into it, it's just Craig with me today. And
sorry.
Sorry, everyone. Like I said, we're over StreamYard. So if it sounds worse than usual, if you like it when the gang's all together and you record anything yourself, make sure you hit up Vaulted Podcasts in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. That's where Matt records his stuff. Also, make sure you go to blindmike.net. That's where you can find links to the Patreon merch. We got Why You Laughing merch. We got Gearhead merch, Blind Mike Project, all that fun stuff. And then that's also where you can get the links for the podcast, the YouTubes. Support all of that. If you can't support the show on Patreon, which we appreciate if you do, but make sure you support the show for free. Leave a 5-star review and everything every other podcast says. When you listen to other podcasts and they tell you what to do that for us as well.
That'd be nice. Helpful.
Yes. So yeah, obviously, Lou's one of my favorite of all time. He had some snafu recently. You haven't seen much of him, but he started to come back. I can't think of what that was. I don't really remember. Well, I suppose we'll talk about it as the day goes on. But Louis had a movie come out, 4th of July. It just premiered recently, and then will be up on streaming soon. So I figured now would be a good time to talk about him. And I think there's a lot to talk about with Louis, but we'll go through the history first. Was Louis one of your guys, Craig, I assume?
I've always liked him for sure, yeah.
I do feel like Chappelle is kind of taking the reins as far as like the philosopher side of George Carlin, but I feel like Louis was the George Carlin of our generation. Like there's a ton of similarities. I mean, you can start with the fact that he essentially copied Carlin's model with the idea of doing a special every year, which now that he's back doing them, he's tried kind of to keep up that pace. COVID obviously got in the way, but you have Sincerely and Sorry come out in the last couple of years. So I do think, like, if you're talking about influences, clearly Carlin seems to be the most prevalent in Louis. Like, I think that seems kind of obvious, particularly where if you look at Carlin, he has some completely silly stuff and some truly brilliant things that you've never thought of and takes on just life in general. And that's what Louis was able to do. But if you go back just like 5 years ago, before the Me Too era, Louis was probably the biggest comedian in the world. And the thing that stuck out to me most is that, you know, we talk about diversity a lot now. We're crazy about diversity. We need more diversity. And Tim Dillon is always the example I use for this, where it's stunning to me that one of the most popular podcasters in the world is a gay man. And, you know, he's also a great comedian. And he doesn't have anything on Netflix. He doesn't have on any of the streaming services. Like, the industry hasn't gone after this guy and said, hey, we could use a gay voice, because he's not a stereotype. He doesn't fit into what they want gay people to be. And Louis is actually a great example of that, because a lot of you might not even know that he is Mexican. He's of Mexican descent. I should say half. He's half Mexican and half Irish, I think.
Yeah.
I got to say, the Irish is a little stronger in his blood, it seems.
For sure. I think that it stands out pretty well, yeah.
I would say so. But that's my point, is that the biggest comedian in the country was a Mexican man, and no one ever mentioned it because he doesn't fit the stereotype. He looks like a white guy, right, and that's not what they want in their diversity. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And back to his him putting out specials every year. I wish he went. I preferred his earlier stuff when they were more spaced out, because there'd be time.
Well, in general, because even I've liked, I think I've liked all his specials, but certainly the few between like 2014 to 2017 were probably weaker than the early ones for sure, and I think weaker than the two that just came out. And that is because you're rushing them out when you put them out in a year,
right?
Like I think he is a brilliant comedic mind that's able to create an hour's worth of content in a year's time. But how much better would that be if he gave it, even an extra 6 months to work on it,
right.
Never mind a year or two,
Exactly my point. Yeah. I just, there'd be things in some of those specials that you're like, I wish he just didn't do that.
Yeah. And you saw people try and copy Louis and try to come out with one a year. And I think that's died down as well, where people are saying, you know what, it's better off if I work. Even the prolific guys like Sam Morril took a couple of years between. Joe List was a couple of years between.
Right. And Burr always goes for 18 months, which I think is probably.
Yeah. And I could even argue that's too much for Burr right now, where he should take a little longer to work on shit before putting it out.
Right.
Anyways. Speaking of influences, we talked about Louis' influences. A guy who was clearly influenced by Louis would be my boy Shane Gillis, who had him on recently for a series called The Presidents, we'll talk about a little the fact that Louis has been on like a podcast run lately. He's done a few public appearances and podcasts, but they've all been themed, shall we say. It's more so that there's a topic that doesn't get brought up rather than a topic that does get brought up. But one of these themes was Matt and Shane had him on to basically just talk about history and the presidents throughout time. And one of these stories was from when he was a very young child and his family had just moved to Mexico. So they came, his father went to Harvard, which I didn't know until doing research for this. And he said that basically life didn't work out for his dad. Like he was a Harvard educated guy, but nothing ever took, let's say, you know what I mean? He wasn't a crazy successful guy or anything. He was around, but Louis didn't know him particularly well. It's amazing the influences I've taken. It's weird. And his mom raised him and it was a single mother who had to work like crazy. They had 4 kids, blah, blah. Anyways, they moved over here when he was 7. And in the Matt and Shane podcast with Louis, I found this story very interesting about how he kind of acclimated himself to American culture.
And I got obsessed with the idea of the president of the United States. That's where it became a thing to me. And the president at the time was Nixon. And I cut a picture out of him out of the paper, and I taped it up next to Nixon? My bed. Yes, I loved Nixon. When I was a little kid, I was so about Richard Nixon. And I wrote a letter to my abuelita, my grandmother. Yeah. And I sent her a picture of Nixon and said, this is the president of the United States. He's the greatest man in the country.
He's so cool.
He's the best man. I didn't know a single thing about him. Yeah. And he had this serious face. And I had a dream. It's the first dream I remember. I don't know if you remember dreams from when you were a kid at all. You ever had a dream that you still remember?
I'm not sure that I do.
So I remember one dream. I was in my bedroom was in the front of our house. So you looked out at the front of our house, and I was asleep, and it was like a Sunday morning, and I heard a band, like a marching band, and I looked outside, and it was Nixon, like walking up my street. Just no spectators. Yeah. Just him walking up followed by a marching band. Boom, 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 boom. And I came out on the front yard. We had this walkway, and he got down on one knee and he said, "Louis." And I ran into his arms.
What the fuck? Damn, you love Nixon.
I loved him so much.
I loved him so much. I love it. That was my favorite story in those podcasts. Was his obsession with Nixon.
Well, him crying, saying I loved him so fucking much. Exactly why that's a good story.
And while we're on the idea of him coming over from Mexico, you know, another guy that fits the same mold of what we were talking about with Louis is Tom Segura.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where if you listen to Segura's podcast, he's had his mom on, who is straight from Peru, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And Tom has done shows in fluent Spanish. But if you look at him, he's just a dumpy white guy. So that's never been part of it. And because he's not made it really part of his act or anything, he doesn't get the whatever the diversity boost is. And guys like Segura and Louis don't need that. But there are people, it is amazing. Like I still think Tim Dillon's the best example, but Fahim Anwar, I hope I'm saying his name right.
Yep.
Is a comedian who was just on Sam Morril and Mark Norman's podcast. And they were talking about this where he's like, he looks white more or less, or, maybe ambiguous, and being of Middle Eastern descent is not part of his act at all. And he said, like, if I made that part of my act, I think that would be a boost for my career, but that's just not how I am. It's not my voice, so it would be inauthentic. So anyways, I don't know why I brought that up. I just think it's an interesting way that Hollywood and the industry look at people. Like, we think they're champions of diversity, but they want you to fit in the box that they want you to be in.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's like.
So little Mexican Louis grew up when they moved here from Mexico. They moved out here to Boston. And Louis started stand-up in high school, and he was very interested in film as well. He started making short films, and I think you can get a bunch of his shorts on his website, where a lot of them were nominated for awards. He made things that went to Sundance and, other festivals that I'm not really aware of, but he made a ton of shorts early on in his career. But he started stand-up when he was 17, bombed, and then got back to it. I think he said he took like a year and a half off or something like that. But this is the story of his first time on stage actually, when I saw him at the premiere of 4th of July, he told a story about walking to the Comedy Connection every night and never getting on, to the point where eventually the owner had to tell him, like, you gotta stop coming here. Like, I'm not going to put you on. I don't think you're funny. But this is the story of his first time on stage.
Well, I got this. I found out that you could do there was an open mic night at a club in Boston where I started, called Stitches. And I was actually like 17, almost 18 years old. And, I thought, geez, you can go on stage. They said you do 5 minutes. You just put your name in a hat and you get on stage. You can be anybody. That was so exciting to me. So I went to this club, Stitches, which is very grown up. They didn't even want to let me in because I was underage, and they have a drinking, a liquor license. And then I went on stage and I did about 2 minutes because I didn't have enough material. Like, I sputtered, my whole throat constricted, and I heard this roaring in my ears. My eyes were watering. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't control myself. I couldn't think straight. And all these adults, like drinking adults, were looking at me like I'm an idiot. And I just walked off stage to kind of confused, like, little applause. And I just felt like a pile of garbage.
Speaking from experience, you don't ever quite realize how long 5 minutes is until someone's like, why don't you get up and say some funny shit? You're like, oh, fuck.
5 minutes feels like forever.
You were just looking at blank faces like, what? Is there a joke here? Like, what are you doing? You're just going to lift up your shirt? What the hell is that?
It's so funny. Like, it feels like 6 hours when you first start. And then once you're in the groove of things, you're like, that's all I get? Fuck.
Right. Yeah. Craig wants to prowl the stage. He says, an hour, that's not enough time.
That's not enough time.
Let me create genius up here.
I think the most I ever did was 35, 40 minutes maybe.
That's a hell of a long time.
It was, but I shouldn't have been up there for that long. I maybe
Oh, I can imagine.
I maybe had 30 that I was like, all right, if I can live and die by this, but I had to stretch it.
So he said the funny thing is, and this is how I always say, like, I wonder, I shouldn't say I always say, because I don't think this is a particularly original thought, but I have wondered, like, is there someone out there who would be better than Michael Jordan at basketball that has never picked up a basketball? And the answer is statistically most likely, particularly in poor countries where they're not even thinking about sports. You could probably pluck an athlete out of there, I would imagine. Comedy, I think, is that even with even greater numbers, because I think there are funny people that try stand up and bomb and are just like, I don't have what it takes for this, and quit. So like the great stand-ups that we see, or even the mediocre stand-ups that we see, or even the bad ones, even Tom Myers had to have the guts to keep getting back up there. So it's not just like the funniest, and that's why a lot of them are introverted weirdos, because it's not always the funniest person. It's the funniest person who also had the balls to keep getting their dick kicked in over and over again.
It's not about how, I mean, it is obviously about how funny you are, but it's also how well do you take bombing and everyone hating you that are staring at you?
Yeah. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize. And I try to say about Brendan Schaub and T.I., like when we talked about celebrities a couple weeks ago, that's why the place to attempt stand-up, even if Brendan Schaub is the most brilliant comedic mind of all time, to figure out the best way to, work your voice is not in front of a theater of people or with a special on Showtime or the, arenas that T.I. is selling out under the guise of performing music. This is just not the right environment for it. And I think Louis is one of the best examples of guys that sometimes it takes 15, 20 years to get good. Where if you look at Louis' early stuff, like, okay, it's fun. It's not unfunny, but you can tell, this is a guy who was telling jokes that became a guy that said, how do I craft these jokes into something that no one's ever heard before?
Yes.
We'll actually play one of the bits in a little bit, but he has bits where the subject matter might make you say like, this is hack. Everyone has talked about this. But then when you hear what he has to say about it, you're like, fuck, I never thought of it that way. It's pretty smart. While he did bomb, he also had a story about, I guess Kevin Meaney went to the store that Louis worked at. Louis worked at like a convenience store in this area. And Kevin Meaney was a frequent customer there, and he would go in. And Louis told him that he did stand-up. And Kevin Meaney said, why don't you come do my show tonight? And Louis did it again, just bombed again. And Kevin Meaney put his head down and like couldn't look at him. But despite all that, Louis obviously became successful fairly early on, to the point where he was writing for, he wrote for Letterman, he wrote for Conan. I didn't realize he auditioned for Saturday Night Live.
I didn't either. Which is probably a good thing that he didn't, can you imagine? It's kind of like we've said about Shane before. Could you imagine Louis fitting on SNL? Not really. No, I could picture Shane before him for sure.
Yeah, and now to be fair, we've also seen Shane do sketches now where like maybe if Louis had a sketch show, we'd be like, oh, fuck, okay, I get it.
Right.
But he did not make SNL, but what he did is he developed a relationship with Robert Smigel. And the only thing I remember from, do you remember Saturday TV Funhouse on SNL?
Yes.
Like the little cartoons they would have in the 90s. The only ones I remember are the ambiguously gay duo.
Correct.
Which I could see Louis writing.
Definitely.
I don't know if those were the sketches he wrote. I know he wrote for Saturday TV Funhouse with Robert Smigel. I'm assuming it was the ambiguously gay duo because that has Louis written all over it, but I'm not 100% sure.
I bet he definitely added on to it. But what do you know what year it was that he was there?
I don't know exactly what year. No, right. mid to late 90s.
He probably definitely wrote some of those, but I feel like I'm pretty sure the ambiguously gay duo has been around forever.
Even earlier than that. That's possible
since
too.
The 80s.
Yeah. So he wrote for Letterman was his first writing job. He went on to write for Conan, which we'll play something from that in a minute. But he was successful early on. He wrote for the Chris Rock show in the 90s as well. He became friends with Chris and like started opening for him and stuff like that. So he was successful early on. So when we'll talk later about him coming for I fucked up early on in this podcast. I realized I thought it would be hilarious if I went like 45 minutes without even acknowledging that Louis got canceled. Mm-hmm. And I forgot that I alluded to it. So I was like, fuck, now I have to say it at some point.
Yeah.
But I lost my train of thought now. What was I saying?
I don't know, but Ambiguously Gay Duo actually started in 96.
Yeah, so there you go. So I think he had his fingerprints on there. That's what I was saying. Thank you. Mm-hmm. He was successful in the 90s and early 2000s. But I would compare him to, I don't know, Mark Norman's level, or I would say maybe even a better comparison is like Hannibal Buress of 10 years ago, where he started to have comedy out there. He had an HBO half hour in the late 90s. He had material out there, like Hannibal wrote for SNL and 30 Rock, and he was a successful comic. But this is where I'll get into the debate of like how much power, quote unquote, he had, because I think it's an interesting conversation. I'm not 100% right on it. Like, I think it's a complex issue, but we'll talk about that more later. I just wanted to set that up. He also directed in 2001 a film called Pootie Tang.
Yes,
which we'll discuss in a moment. But first, our next clip is about Conan, right?
Yeah.
On Seth Meyers.
Yep.
So this is him talking about his writing experience with Seth Meyers when he was a writer for Conan.
Answer. Yeah, because on basically you try to find your way around the approval process. There's a head writer and there's producers and there's standards of practice. But on Conan's show, there was a announcer named Joel, and he would make a little joke before he said Conan's name, like a little offside joke. So me and my friend Dino, who were like two of the more, had been there longer than other writers, we realized nobody checks those. You just write them and you hand them to the guy. So
the side door.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we were like, what can we? So we came up with one, which was he said, he goes, last night the missus gave me a pearl necklace.
I like the idea of like, you think that television and film industries are such, tight knit operations. I like the idea of guys just fucking around.
Yeah.
And that gets on the air. By the way, a little fun fact for you Community fans out there. His friend Dino that he referred to is Star Burns in the show Community. So little piece of history there for you folks. But yeah, like I said, he also directed his directorial debut. Aside from, like I said, shorts and things like that he had made. He made a film called Pootie Tang, which I had heard about forever. I know Chris Rock starred in and Louis directed a film called Pootie Tang that bombed horribly. I never knew what it was about. I didn't realize it was a superhero movie.
I haven't seen it probably in 15 years.
You have seen it, though?
I couldn't tell you anything about it. It's been forever.
Oh, I was going to ask, were there redeemable quality? Like, was it a cult? Because some places refer to it as a cult classic, which I don't really think of it as. It's more of you reference it as Louis' biggest bomb in his career, and Chris Rock.
It's kind of become a cult classic.
But what I'm asking is because it's so bad, or were there funny parts to it?
I'd have to rewatch. I'm sure there's actually funny things in there, knowing him.
So what Louis said about it was basically that because it was a superhero movie, the studio saw franchise potential. So they had a ton of notes and things they wanted to do that would, warrant a sequel and things like that. And Louis was like, no, this is supposed to be just a weird project that we're working on. And it's not about making the Avengers. And so they got bogged down with notes, and Louis ended up getting fired as the director. Like, he directed the entirety of the film, but they took him off of it, like, through the editing process, and the studio changed it a whole bunch. That's not to say I have no idea if Louis remained on. That I'm not saying it would have been, The Dark Knight, but that is probably the biggest bomb of both him and Chris Rock's career. It's also the most hilarious. Like, you have to know that your movie is going to be good to call it Pootie Tang.
Right.
Because otherwise it's a hilarious punchline for a bad movie.
Was Tim Meadows in that as well? I don't remember.
I don't know. I can't remember seeing him in the trailer, but anyways. So that takes us to the early 2000s. What's the next clip we have?
Lucky Louie.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, Louis was a successful comic. And because of that, he got he worked on the Chris Rock show. He had HBO material out there, and he was able to get Lucky Louie. Now, on Lucky Louie, he was the showrunner. Or I don't know if showrunner is the actual term for what he did, but he was the creator. He was the star. So that's where you start to see Louis have actual power in comedy around 2005.
Don't say that P word.
Why is that?
Because that's the what led to a lot of accusations.
Oh, well, I'm trying to be as honest as I can about it. Put my biases aside. 2005 is where you can say he got power in comedy, particularly with the staff. Again, if you're talking about other comedians, I would say Mark Normand, Hannibal Buress 10 years ago, whatever, are not powerful in the sense that, Mark Normand couldn't ruin your career. You know what I mean? So that's the weird thing where you start talking about power is, do these people view themselves as powerful? And that's where I think it becomes an interesting debate. But anyways, you said we had a clip about Lucky Louie?
It's Opie and Anthony clip.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah. So let's hear that. We're starting to get into some Opie and Anthony stuff, which is some other funny stuff as well. But let me hear about Lucky Louie.
I'd like to bring up, by the way, my name's Louis C.K. and I had a show called Lucky Louie.
And I should have set this up a little better. This is with Bill Donahue, the head of the Catholic League, who went after Opie and Anthony for Sex for Sam, which we mentioned in the Sex for Sam episode. Bill Donahue also went after Lucky Louie for there was basically an episode about Louis trying to satisfy his wife and having sex for pleasure, that sort of a thing. And the Catholic League put out a statement on that, condemning Lucky Louie and saying it should be taken off the air, blah, blah, blah. So Bill Donahue was on Opie and Anthony, and this is Louis confronting him about that.
I'd like to bring up, by the way, my name's Louis C.K. and I had a show called Lucky Louie, and you issued a press release saying a lot of negative things about my show. So I'm on the radio with you. I can't not mention it. I remember one thing you said. You made a list of things that were offensive to Catholics about Lucky Louie, and one of them was an episode we did where I wanted to help my wife have an orgasm before we decided not to have another child until we were having good sex and she was having an orgasm, and you listed that as something that's offensive to Catholics, which I don't understand, because a married couple trying to make sure that their sex life is healthy before moving on to a second child, how can you have a problem with that?
Did I have a problem with
that? I think that's the greatest clip to show, like with all the horse shit you deal with now, the idea of how thin their outrage is. You know what I mean? Like, there are people that will start campaigns to get shows off air and things like that. And if enough time passes, they're like, fuck, did I say that? Did I give a shit about that?
I said
to
that.
Where even the head of the Catholic League is like, was I mad about that?
I'm sure he also worded that so it came across less harsh than the show did.
Right. Yeah. So Lucky Louie was a good show. It was an interesting show. If you're not familiar, it only lasted one season. It co-starred Pamela Adlon, Jim Norton, Nick DiPaolo. God damn it. I'm blanking on the other guy's name. He passed away, unfortunately. Very funny actor. Also in the Amco episode of Curb, if anyone knows who I'm talking about. But it was, what was unique about it was similar to Roseanne as far as the set, in that it was like a very drab, it looked like an actual, New York apartment where it was just very, drab. They didn't have a lot of money, that sort of thing. Like, it reminded me of Roseanne and the look of it. And the other thing that was interesting about it was the studio audience was kind of like Larry David tried to do with Seinfeld. But when jokes bombed, you just wouldn't hear a laugh, which is, you don't get that out of a lot of sitcoms. Like Louis wanted to leave in the real reaction of the audience. They didn't pipe in the laugh track or any extra crowd noise or anything. But because of that, because of things like that, and like I said, because the set was very drab, and I think it's the only show. It was the first, and I can't think of one since that HBO has done with a live studio audience. Like they don't really do sitcoms in that way, you know? So I think because of all of that, it just tanked. Like no one watched it. And then it became kind of a cult classic. Now it's off of HBO. I can't think of why, but it's not there. And I don't know. I don't know if there's anywhere people can see it, because Louis recently just put on his website the show Louis that was on FX. But I don't know if there's anywhere you can find Lucky Louie, unfortunately.
I've been looking for it for a long time.
Yeah. And if Craig can't find it, it ain't out there, folks.
No.
Do I want to talk about... We'll get to the show Louis in a second, but is our next clip another Opie and Anthony classic?
Yeah, it's literally one of my favorite things he ever did.
Yeah. So if you guys don't know, if you're not as familiar as O&A as we are, they essentially had a stable of, at the time, younger comedians. Obviously, Jim Norton was in there every day. And we all know Patrice O'Neill, Rich Voss, Bob Kelly, the regulars kind of. But they also had Colin Quinn, Bill Burr, Louis C.K., Jim Jeffries, like a lot of the people who are the top comedians in the world right now were on O&A regularly. And because Louis got so huge, you forget he was on O&A all the time.
Right.
And he would fill in for Norton sometimes. And when they had him on, they did a run on where half the day they were on terrestrial radio on Howard Stern's old stations. And every time Louis was on, he would forget that they weren't on XM and say something that they would have to dump out on or something like that. But it was never fuck, or like he would never get thrown off for cursing. He would say things like, anal fisting and shit like that, and then he'd be like, what, you can't say that on the radio? And they're like, no, of course not.
No, you can't, actually.
But which is amazing when you go listen to some old Howard Stern clips of what they could say. But
right,
as we pointed out. But so Louis was on one day when they had Donald Rumsfeld on, which if you're not familiar with Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense during the Bush era. And he's seen some shit. He's been in politics forever. Is he still with us? I think he died.
Did he?
I could be wrong.
See.
Well, rest in peace if you're no longer with us, Donald. But he was on O&A, and if you know O&A, you know that Anthony's a big Republican, and I think he wanted to do like a serious interview with Donald Rumsfeld. And this is how Louis contributed to that.
He died almost exactly a year ago.
I knew it. That's why I'm doing this episode. Rest in peace, Donnie.
Needs to serve.
It's interesting though, because there are people who think. I mean, here's a guy who, met Eisenhower as a congressman, right?
I was running for Congress, exactly.
And worked for Ford and Nixon and Reagan and both Bushes. And there's still those people out there that think, Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney are actually lizards who, literally there's people that think they're lizards from outer space.
Yeah, that's true.
Who eat human flesh. I don't know if anybody's ever asked you directly, sir, but are you a lizard?
I don't think
are you actually, can you just please give that a straight answer? Are you a lizard person?
Louis a little left-leaning,
No,
sir.
I'm not. Let him answer. Are you a lizard?
Here's the short answer. I'm in New York City. I walk down the street. People walk up, shake hands, stop me. They want an autograph. lizard. Want to get a photograph with me? Go to eat last night at dinner, and Joyce and I were sitting there in the little Italian restaurant, and a man came up to buy my dinner, and it turns out I paid for my dinner. The next thing I know, the waiter comes back and said the man insisted to pay for your dinner, and here's your canceled receipt.
See, there's plenty of people that
But he's
not going to
I think you're
dignify.
hanging around with the wrong people.
He's not going to dignify an answer to "Are you a lizard, Louis?" Why not? Because he's not a lizard.
What is this story about getting somebody paid for your dinner? I would pay for it.
So it's so bizarre. Well, so if you've never heard the interview, go check it out on YouTube, because like 10 more times Louis says, I don't understand why you can't answer like yes or no. Are you a lizard? Which is a tremendous point, because if you hear Rumsfeld at the start of that answer, he goes, "Here's the short answer." The short answer would be no.
Here's the short answer. Someone bought me dinner. It makes me laugh every time I hear it.
And then he goes into the story about someone buying him dinner, and then he says, "You're messing with the wrong people," which I don't know what the hell that was supposed to mean. And I thought this was until the domestic violence arrest, I thought this was Anthony Cumia's worst moment, because unless he was completely in on it,
I think he was,
and doing it because of that. But every time if he's in on it, he did a bad job of being in on it, because he would interrupt Rumsfeld and say, like, he's not going to answer that. Whereas he should have made Donald Rumsfeld answer that every single time. And I think Louis said to him, like, why wouldn't you want to live in that world where he has to answer whether or not he's a lizard?
See, I think he was honestly playing the Opie role of making sure that this doesn't end.
Right. Like, don't hang up, sir. I'm on your side. That's definitely possible.
If I'm remembering right, I'm pretty sure he admits to that after he does hang up.
No, that's what made me think it wasn't a bit, because after they hang up, Louis says, why wouldn't you want to live in that world? And Anthony says he's not going to answer that. And my thought was, like, you got to make him answer it. That would be the hilarious thing.
That show is the best.
Either way, that clip was... It certainly wasn't the first time I heard about Louis. Like, I remember liking Louis when I was fairly young, but I remember that, like, in the somewhat early day, that was probably around 2010-ish, 2009 maybe.
Somewhere.
So, the earlier days of YouTube, and I remember that going around and people talking about that. And Louis had a few moments like that. Like, YouTube was a big boost to Louis' career, where, like I said, in the comedy world, like, if you were a comedy nerd, you knew who Louis C.K. was. And by this point, you knew him as, like, one of the funniest guys ever. But mainstream people didn't really know that. And the thing that people's kind of credit with him starting to get really big was his clip on Conan, where he talks about just modern technology and our reaction to it. So this is a little bit of that from, I think, when Conan was on the Tonight Show, right?
I believe so, judging by the set.
Yeah.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't... Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow for you? Yeah. I was on an airplane, and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane, and they go, open up your laptop. You can go on the internet. And it's fast, and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down. And they apologize, the internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, this is bull. Like, how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
And that might even be the last time you can mark something on the Tonight Show making a star out of someone.
Oh, I know.
Like, it doesn't happen anymore. And now they don't even really try to make it happen. Like, there was a time where Jimmy Fallon's videos would go viral and things like that. But
So yeah, that was kind of the start of Louis getting like really popular, and he used that in his show Louis, which was on FX. Which
Great show.
What's that?
Great show.
I don't think I included the clip for that, did I?
No,
I don't have any Louis related clips.
Nope.
Because it was too long, and the story was the way he told it was a little long and convoluted. But basically, when he told the story of getting Louis, he was kind of at a point in his career where like he was content with doing stand up, and just that's how he made his money, was stand up gigs every weekend. And after the Lucky Louie experience, like he wasn't 100% sure that he even wanted to go back to TV. So he went into FX with leverage, and NBC had offered him some kind of deal, and I think maybe CBS as well. But, you know, if you know anything about Louis C.K., him on NBC would be such a neutered version.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean? Especially of how weird that show was. Like an actual network would have bogged them down with notes and wouldn't have allowed so much weirdness.
Right.
You know, because a lot of people didn't get it. A lot of people don't get that show.
There's a scene on that show that we actually reference kind of often on Blind Mike Project when they were talking about where the origin of the origin of the F word, the gay F slur.
Yes.
And that wouldn't have aired on any other station, I don't think.
No way. And it's one of the most like progressive scenes on television.
Right. I actually learned something.
Me too. Yeah, I consciously made an effort to not use that word because I was a kid that said that shit all the time. Mm-hmm. And it taught me. I was like, oh, okay. He also, you know, had the episode that we talked about with Dane Cook.
Yeah.
In Dane Cook's episode, we played a little bit of that. There was a lot of very interesting stuff he did, even to the point where like he cast in season 3, casts his ex-wife.
Mm-hmm.
And he in the first 2 seasons, he shows his kid. They're like lily white blonde girls are play his 2 daughters.
Right.
And then they show his wife in an episode in season 3, and it is a black woman. Not like mixed race, like she's an African-American woman, and they never mention it, which is very odd. And then I heard Louis talk about, like, someone asked him, why did you choose that? And he goes, I thought it'd just be funny for people to see these 2 lily white children, and I never addressed that their mother's black. Just a weird thing that he threw in to see if people asked about it. And of course they did. So he went into FX and basically said, I want to write the show myself. I want to edit it myself. I want to direct it, blah, blah, blah. I want full control of the show. And they were like, well, we've never done that with anyone. And he's like, all right, well, we don't have to do it then. I just won't do a show. And they're like, all right, no, we'll do the show. Like, you know what I mean? Like he went in with the ability to say no, which most people pitching a television show are just like, I just want to get this fucking thing on the air.
Yeah,
so I'll suck your dick, whatever it takes.
Yeah, he had so much power.
Yeah, you know what, Craig? We're starting to get to that point.
That's all we
2010-ish.
It's all we have left, actually.
We're starting to get to the point where he had power. But oddly enough, we're also getting to the point where he cut out some habits out of his life. So I'll take these broads down in a few minutes, but we're not there yet. The other interesting thing about that Conan clip is that he used that as probably my favorite run of episodes on Louis, were the 3 episodes he did about trying to take over the Late Show for David Letterman. And those episodes start with him filling in for someone on the Tonight Show, and that clip going viral. So it was, you know, he wove his life into the story. And it also showed like they had to do a few segments where Louis has celebrity guests on and has to like introduce segments and shit like that. And it was the only time I'd ever thought like, oh, Louis might be okay as a late night host. Like you would not think that, but he at least in that episode handled it well.
I think he would be good at late night because he wouldn't take the bullshit or do what the networks say.
Yeah, I can't put him. Norm is still the one guy I wish got a late night show most of all. Yeah, that's our mention of Norm Macdonald Live, the greatest talk show of all time.
Greatest show.
Check. We've done that one.
Nailed it.
But when I saw that scene, I was like, shit, Louis might have been good at that. So if you're talking revisionist history, I'd have to throw that on the board just because he's kind of done everything else. Like he's made now movies that I like, or a movie that I like, made multiple TV shows that I like, and obviously had tremendous stand-up albums. You know what? We'll talk about it in a minute. He did a podcast. I was going to say he would do an interesting podcast, and then I remember he did one for a run that no one listened to other than me, apparently.
What was it called?
But we'll talk about it in a second because I don't want to spoil it for any of the kids out there. What happens? There's a twist ending in Louis' career that we haven't quite gotten to yet. Is that the next clip that we have?
Jen Kirkman.
Yeah. So we'll get into it, folks.
All right.
Now, like Louis, what's that?
All right. I guess we'll get into it.
If we have to twist my arm, I guess we'll get into it. So Louis at this time now he's been in American Hustle and, which is a weird role for him, meaning like he went from a guy that was just he was the comics comic. They even referenced that in the show Louis, that people thought of him the same way we now think of Dave Attell and Colin Quinn, where he's a brilliant stand-up where outside of that world, no one really knew who he was. Then after Louis won a bunch of Emmys, then he starts getting movie roles with Bradley Cooper and Christian Bale, and he kind of starts hanging with that crowd. And it was interesting to hear him talk about, he was on Are You Garbage recently, I think.
Yes.
And he mentioned the period of time where he started wearing suits on stage. And his special 2017, which I believe is still on Netflix, he's wearing a suit. That's the one that he's wearing a suit for. And he said, like, I started to think like, hey, I'm doing a thing. Like I wanted to make it seem like this is an important thing that I'm doing. So I wanted to dress like it was an important thing that I'm doing. And now when he talked about it in Are You Garbage, he said, I'll never do that again. I'm going back to just, black t-shirt and jeans, which is what he's more known for. But the suit thing, I think, was representative of the, ultimate demise of Louis.
Right.
Because he started wearing a suit on stage. You started seeing him wear glasses more and pop up on red carpets and hang out with the Bradley Coopers of the world. And there was also an interesting thing of he has an email list. Oh, that's the other thing I should have mentioned. I apologize. Louis also started the trend of just putting out your own special yourself.
Saves a lot of money.
Yeah. And now you see it in the YouTube world with Schultz and Morrill and these guys doing it themselves and putting it on YouTube. But Louis was the first guy that put it out himself and sold it. And then comics started to realize like, oh, well, if the industry is not going to give us a shot, we don't need it. And then Gaffigan and Aziz did it and sold a ton. Now, to be fair, you do have to have an audience to do that. You know what I mean? For sure. Like a guy with his first album is not going to be able to just, hey, go to my website and buy it and see any results from that. So, easier said than done for Louis to say like, this is the model that you could use. But Louis also helped out comedians. Like he would put Todd Barry's album on his website and sell it. So if you look at it that way, Louis is basically paying it forward and saying, I'm not just using my website to promote myself, but here's a great comic that you may not have heard of. Like I think Todd Barry's hilarious.
Here's a bunch of specials for a bunch of enablers, as the world likes to look at them.
Yes, you're darn right. That's what they are. So Louis built up an email list, and after he stopped selling his specials and stuff like that, he started using his email list for tour updates. And then the weirdest email to be fired off from that list ever, in my opinion, was in the fall of 2016. Where he told everyone to vote for Hillary Clinton and talked about what a great mother she was. It was very odd and out of character for Louis.
It was really unfortunate.
The reason I mentioned that is I do believe there's something to the idea of when you step out of character is when the cancel culture mob is most ready to feast. You know what I mean? Like that's Shane getting SNL. Another example. He's not supposed to be on that, So that's when they strike and get you. Like Louis being on red carpets and endorsing politicians and things like that. He stepped out of his role. And I think that's when people were ready to pounce. Not to say that his cancellation wouldn't have happened anyways, but I had heard not rumors. I'd heard these stories way before the New York Times article.
Me too.
And I don't know if you know this, folks. I am broadcasting from a closet in my house with a Freddie Mercury picture behind me, but I'm not a Hollywood insider, despite how it may look. So it kind of started, I think this might have been the first place I heard it, was when Jen Kirkman was on the Nerdist podcast. Ironically, Chris Hardwick hosting this show, which he also suffered fate, but he's back now.
He got a rare W out of that, though.
Yeah, that's what Hardwick and Aziz started to turn the tides. Boy, does Louis wish his article came out after those two. Okay. Instead of with Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein. But here's Jen Kirkman's story, which I find very interesting based on the way history's changed course a little bit. But here she is on the Nerdist in 2012, while Louis was on his rise to stardom, basically.
I had an incident that I talked about on my podcast that I had to take down because people weren't understanding it. And actually feminists and male feminists were coming at me, and I was like, it's nuanced. So I talked about an experience I had with a male comic from about 10 years ago.
Sure.
Who said something kind of creepy to me. In no way physically violated my space. I did not see his body parts. He did not corner me. It was just a couple creepy incidents. And this person is a friend. I dare not call them a peer anymore because they were very successful, but he was sort of not a mentor, but in a few times took me aside and said, go further with that bit. Or I encourage you to do the comedy clubs. Don't just stay in the alternative rooms, whatever. Great person, whatever. I lost touch with him, whatever. But I was like, God, those moments were so creepy. Just the words that, but it was fine. It was one of those things where it's like, I told other people about it because we were laughing about it.
So that's an interesting way of telling that story where she's telling it from her perspective of almost defending Louis.
Right.
Now you can look at that and say maybe she was afraid. She didn't want to piss off Louis because he's gotten powerful now. So she kind of backtracked and said, no, you misunderstood what I said. But the reason I find that clip, it's confusing to me. I'd like to talk to Jen Kirkman about it if I ever get the chance, but she now will go on, like when Louis won a Grammy this year for Sincerely, she went on a Twitter tirade like you wouldn't believe, saying, you people have forgotten the Me Too movement and this is disrespectful to women and all sorts of, she went on she seemed very, very emotional about the idea that Louis was being allowed back into society or how the good graces of society, I guess.
She was trying to get the
which
likes.
Is interesting. Well, it's hard to say. I don't know if in that clip with Chris Hardwick, if she's coming from a place of like, oh, you people are blowing it out of proportion, or I'm scared for my career, so I'm backpedaling a little bit. Because it genuinely could be both. I don't know.
I guess so.
But I mean, like if you take her at her word there, it's interesting, how much things have changed in 7 years or whatever it's been, because that's her trying to save her career. Whereas if you try to save your career now, this is the kind of comment you have to backpedal on with Sarah Silverman on the Howard Stern show. So this is after the New York Times article. So I've made a joke about alluding to it, but if you guys aren't aware, right after Harvey Weinstein, people say, hey, Harvey Weinstein's a rapist. And then the order of things was now batting Louis C.K. to clean up for Harvey Weinstein. So Louis was like right in the midst of, you have, real predators like Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and these people. And then, you have Louis C.K., where his, I believe, is more of a gray area. So this is Howard Stern, Sarah Silverman talking to Howard Stern after the New York Times article came out.
you know, anyway.
So getting back to Louis, Louis, a brilliant comedian, you're saying that you were conflicted in that this is a friend of yours and it's very difficult.
Listen, I don't know if I'm going to regret saying this, but I've known Louis forever. I'm not making excuses for him. Please don't take this that way. But, you know, we are peers. We're equals. So, you know, when I was, you know, when we were kids and he asked if he could masturbate in front of me, sometimes I'd go, fuck yeah, I want to see that.
Really?
Yeah. It was like science.
So he did masturbate in front of you.
Well, I mean, now I feel like, you know, listen, any one of us comics, especially people who are close to him, we can't promote a show or go on and do any press without someone bringing up Louis. So at some point, it's like, you've got to, you know, it's like, well, you spoke out about, well, I didn't speak out. I had an interview, you know, and I answered honestly because that's what I do.
Yeah.
But yeah. And
so you and Louis were.
But it's not analogous to the other women in this that are talking about the predicament, you know, the what he did to them, because he could offer me nothing. We were only just friends. So sometimes, yeah, I wanted to see it. It was amazing. Sometimes I'd be like, fucking gross. No. And we'd get pizza. So I'm not saying what he does is okay. What he did was okay. I'm just saying at a certain point when he became an influential, not even famous, but influential in the world of comedy, it changes because and he realized that. He realized it later, but certainly before that New York Times, and even in that New York Times article, forgive me, they talk about how he went on and tried to connect with some of these women to say, I fucked up and wronged you and I want to make this right.
So it's it's fascinating to go back and listen to that clip with Sarah Silverman because she throws a lot in there. She says, she acknowledges, hey, I'm not below Louis in the industry. Like, so I don't know what it was like to feel like I had to say yes to this bizarre request of Louis, you know, jerking off in front of me. So, you know, he would ask women, like, you want to go back to my hotel room? But it's interesting to hear Sarah throw that in. So she acknowledges, hey, I'm not in the same situation as Jen Kirkman, or any of these other women, the women that wrote on the Chris Rock show or anything like that. So the other thing that's interesting about it is she says in there, he acknowledged that and he realized he fucked up, and it was way before the New York Times article came out. Sarah Silverman had to apologize for that. If you aren't aware of that, after that came out, she took a beating on social media and all that. People were criticizing her, saying she doesn't support women, this and that. And if you look back in time, because you kind of hear that's the old Sarah Silverman we were just listening to, right? You know, she was kind of having fun and she was taking it seriously, but like being fun and funny as well. Go listen to my boys over at Who Are These Podcasts have broken her podcast down a few times. I mean, the humor has been sucked out of Sarah Silverman. It's all political talk and, you know, feeling guilty, you know, white guilt. She feels guilty about her success, all that sort of shit. Like, it's not the same Sarah Silverman anymore. And I truly believe that a big contributing factor in that was people hammering her for this and saying she doesn't support women. And that, you know, maybe took her by surprise to where she says, like, okay, I got to watch what I say now. And I think it just changed her the way it does a lot of people.
For sure, because the Sarah Silverman that annoys everyone today would not even come close to that level of conversation.
No, she was completely silly, and she would even on an episode of Louis, oddly enough, she made fun of the character where she on stage, she was basically like, oops, did I just say that? Like, that was early Sarah Silverman, and she was, you know, one of the guys, for lack of a better term, and that was detrimental to her because people ended up criticizing her for it. But I should backtrack a little bit and talk about a different female comedian by the name of Roseanne, who I believe she tweeted this, which we all know how reliable Roseanne's Twitter can be. But the first time this became the story, long before the New York Times article, Roseanne tweeted basically saying, I'm hearing these rumors about Louis. If this is true, he should apologize, blah, blah, blah. And then she also went back and said, like, to be clear, I don't know if they're true. Like, if they are, I don't agree. Like, I think they're terrible. But I just don't know. So Roseanne brought it up on Twitter. Again, I heard about it, and I remember a lot of people saying, including myself, like I thought this at the time, but I remember people hearing these rumors and their reaction was, oh boy, I hope it doesn't get any worse. Like, that's weird, of course, the idea of him jerking off in front of women, but I hope it doesn't get any worse than that. And what Roseanne said is, I've heard Louis is blocking the door and not letting these women out. So if you want to know where that comes from, it's that.
Because that went huge, and that's all anyone refers to.
Yeah. And we all know that Valerie Jarrett is a white woman. So Roseanne is never wrong about anything.
Right.
But that's what it's referring to is Roseanne saying, I've heard he's blocked the door. The New York Times article doesn't have any proof of that. The women that I've heard come out have never even alleged that. They haven't said Louis blocked the door and wouldn't let me leave. They said he invited us up to his hotel room. We're like, yeah, sure. He asked if he could jerk off in front of us. We thought he was joking. And then he ended up doing it, and we felt creeped out. To me, you know, like people say, I don't believe women. I believe these women. Like I believe that happened. Mm-hmm. And I believe they felt maybe pressure because Louis was a bigger comedian. But I do think in 2005 and prior, that wasn't how people thought, particularly like a guy like Louis. Like, I don't know if you're at that point in the industry, you're thinking, oh, I have power over these women. They have to say yes to coming back to my hotel room.
Right.
That's just not how the country thought. Now it is. And I think that's a good thing that that's how we think. I do think it's also made for like weird workplace environments where, you know, that's where a lot of people meet each other is at work. So is every time they start dating, is that a victim dating their superior? Like, how does that work? It's very confusing. But my point is that there aren't really allegations of Louis forcing women into anything. And the clip I very badly wanted to include in this and doesn't exist anymore. It's been scrubbed off of YouTube. Interesting how that works. If you want to find it, you can go to patreon.com/blindmike because one of the very first things I did on Patreon was a series called Who's Really Been Canceled, where I talked about stuff like this. And I included this clip from Ari Shaffir in one of the episodes where Ari was on Joe Rogan. And I've heard Ari say this a couple different places, but it's been, you know, wiped off the face of the world, apparently. But he was talking about what seemed like a conversation that he had with Louis, but he was very vague. And he was kind of defending Louis. And then he says, well, let's say you're in a scenario where you're texting these women and they're texting you back like in a flirty, kind of sexting type of way. And then you say, let's meet up, and you meet up for a drink. And then, you know, you're kind of flirting there and having a nice conversation. And you're like, all right, I still don't know what this is. So let me invite him back to my hotel room. And I say, do you want to come back to my hotel room? And they say, yeah, sure. Let's go back to your hotel room. And then you get back to his hotel room and he says, you know what? I'm still not sure. Let me ask, may I jerk off in front of you? They say yes. And that still wasn't enough consent to be like, well, they're adults, you know?
Right.
So that's the thing that's weird to me. And there are also stories of Louis asking women that and them saying, no, I would like you to not do that. And him getting embarrassed and apologizing and walking away. So my thoughts on Louis are certainly that he's a weird guy. And he even has a bit about being a weird guy and people knowing his thing now. He's like, Obama knows my thing. So here's where we get into a strange area. Louis said he apologized for his actions in print. He didn't do an interview or anything. He released a statement where he apologized to the victims. I have no idea who he talked to and didn't talk to privately. as far as apologies go. But he released a statement. He was the only one during the Me Too era to have done that, to have acknowledged he was wrong in some way. And then you didn't hear from him for, I think it was like 18 months or something like that.
It was a long time.
Yeah, maybe even closer to 2 years. And then you started seeing Louis pop up in different places. And one of the places he popped up was Skankfest, which I was at, by the way. And a broad named Alba needed to take a nap. So we ended up missing the surprise guest of Louis C.K. But the reason I mentioned that is that I think Louis J. Gomez tweeted out the video of Louis walking on stage. And was just like surprise guest at Skankfest, and the crowd went fucking bananas. People were so excited to see him. And the rest of the weekend that I was there, I was talking to people like, "Oh, did you get to see Louis?" Everyone was so excited. They couldn't believe it. It was the greatest surprise to a group of dirtball comedy fans like ourselves. Meanwhile, the next day, an article came out saying that Louis essentially victimized these people by showing up there. And when they asked the Brooklyn Bazaar, which was the venue we were at, the Brooklyn Bazaar said the staff felt like they couldn't leave. Which I don't even know what that means. They made it seem like Louis broke in and was like, "Now I got you. I'm going to perform stand-up in front of you."
Well, they probably feel like they can't leave because they're on the clock and working for the venue.
Yeah, that's actually good. I got to say, I've never been a boss of employees before, but I feel like it would be a good thing if the employees don't just leave in the middle of the workday.
Correct. That seems like a good start.
but yeah, so the Brooklyn Bazaar like throws him under the bus. The Comedy Cellar stood by him, but I also remember Noam, who runs the Comedy Cellar, kind of making statements where like he sort of apologized for it. And I thought that was a little weird because it's like, now you're apologizing for just having comedians on. You know what I mean? Like that's a weird thing to do when you're in comedy, because then does it go to the level of you're apologizing to have Doug Stanhope on? He can be offensive. You know, are you apologizing for that? Like that's where it starts to get weird.
Plus, the Comedy Cellar is not as popular right now without Louis because that television show and the open and everything.
He made it incredibly popular.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, there was a lot of backlash everywhere Louis went. There were people would protest his gigs, things like that. And then he had a gig at Governor's in Long Island. I think it was Governor's. Where he did an hour set, and someone recorded that. Someone in the audience recorded that from their phone and just put it on YouTube the next day. And I remember like, holy shit, an hour of Louis' material came out. And then I saw that it was just some like random account. I was like, how did they get a hold of this? And it was just someone in the audience that recorded it, put it up. And in that hour of material, he had a bit about the Parkland shooting, where the bit was essentially, of course, I'm going to butcher it because I'm not Louis C.K., but the gist of it was talking about like the Parkland kids, like David Hogg, now going on like speaking tours and being, political voices when they were like, 16, 17 years old. And Louis was like, why do I have to listen to you? It doesn't make you interesting because you were in a shooting. And that was the gist of the bit. It was much funnier than I'm making it. But that's more or less what it was. And then parents of the Parkland shooters started coming out and threatening to fight Louis. Like, I dare you to say that to my face. And my point to that would be like, well, he didn't say it to your face. That was kind of the point. He did it on stage. You were never supposed to hear it. It doesn't make any sense to be like, say that to my face. He's not attacking you. Then comedians started going after him, like Judd Apatow.
I fucking hate Judd Apatow.
I probably could have included a lot of this audio. There was just too much. Go do yourself a favor. Go listen to Judd Apatow and Pete Holmes on Jim Norton and Sam Roberts. Jim Norton does a great job defending not just Louis, but like comedians in general. And Andrew Santino also has a clip where he's kind of pissed at Judd Apatow and defending comedians as well. So Judd Apatow went after Louis and started going nuts on him on Twitter and saying that shouldn't be allowed, all sorts of nonsense. And the point of a lot of comedians was, Judd, you're a comic, allegedly. You do stand-up. He's a stand-up special on Netflix, so that seems to be proof that he's a comedian. You're attacking people for material that wasn't worked out, that wasn't supposed to be heard by a mass audience yet. It wasn't supposed to be dissected. It was literally him working on material. So you have no idea what that bit would have been by the time we were supposed to hear it. So Judd kind of sandbagged comedians in a dirty way. And he was part of this group of people who were like, now Louis not funny. Like, that started to become a trend where people would be like, you know, and it was almost entirely jealous comedians or people who weren't familiar with his comedy to begin with, where they were like, oh, you know what? He was never funny. Which even with Cosby, like, I was never a Cosby fan, but that's how I always say it. I'm like, oh yeah, I never found Cosby funny, but people consider him a genius. Like, he inspired generations of comedians.
There was some club in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, somewhere in Pennsylvania, that canceled Louis' shows. Yeah, I forget what it was. Oh no, sorry, excuse me. There was a guy, like an open micer, who said he's never going to perform there again because they had Louis on.
Oh dear.
It was. So then it went crazy popular. The kids are fucking nothing. Literally an open micer. And then I think it was Tig Notaro or someone like that was like, oh, I'm going to take you on the road with me. And they started touring with them.
Oh, well, you have a clip of Tig Notaro as well, right?
Yeah, it's the last clip I have.
Is that our last clip? Yeah, so let's hear from Tig. Louis did a lot for comics. And again, that shouldn't buy just goodwill hall pass for the rest of your life. I'm not saying that. But Louis created the show Baskets with Zach Galifianakis. Like I said, in the show, Louis, he would have people like Todd Barry, DePaulo was in a bunch of episodes. Mm-hmm. But he would even have comedians do sets on his show for, it was 30 seconds to a minute or something. But it is a comic getting a joke on television is a big deal to a lot of people. And it's generally people you hadn't necessarily heard of. So he did a lot for comedians in that way. Tig Notaro was one of those people. He co-created her show with her. It's very interesting, the timeline where Tig Notaro was trying to separate herself from Louis C.K., which she'll talk about in this clip.
I mean, it's a huge relief, but it's a relief to have him removed. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been, I found this out right after we sold the show that this was happening, and I started publicly trying to distance myself from him for almost 2 years now. Yeah. And then when this all came out, even though I knew firsthand from people, it wasn't my place to call out names. It's somebody else's story.
It's hearsay.
It's for them to directly speak about. But I knew for myself, I wanted to
there were rumors in the comedy.
Yes,
business.
but I had gotten confirmation.
From those girls.
Yeah, and so that's when I started removing myself.
Did he ever harass you? Did you ever have a personal experience with him?
Nothing like that.
Okay.
But I like I said, started distancing myself.
What if I hate her so much?
It's such a weird answer because it's like she wants to say yes, but nothing happened. So she can't. She's not going to lie, I guess. But it was very weird. But let me try this for a second. Craig, I'm going to try and let's pretend you've been in a horrible controversy.
Okay.
I'm going to try and distance myself from you.
All right.
You're off the podcast.
Fuck, that worked really well.
All right. Distanced. I don't get what you mean. You were trying for 2 years?
Well, my favorite thing is she goes, oh, I found out right after we sold the show.
You wouldn't believe it. They bought it, and boy, I looked at the New York Times. You wouldn't believe it.
Ugh, I hate her so much.
Right in the office of the studio exec, you had a copy. I'm like, I wish I looked at this earlier.
Yeah, it's like 2 weeks before. Oh, jeez. Would you look at that?
So I don't know. I will probably take a lot of shit for this episode. I think most people listening probably already know my stance anyways. But again, this is not like victim blaming or saying anyone's lying. What it's saying is that Louis had a weird fetish. I've not heard any reports of him doing it in the last 10 to 15 years, really.
Right.
Evidently he stopped by Sarah Silverman's account. He stopped by his own account. He stopped doing that a long time ago. So I guess my point was to lump him in with Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey was unfair. He should have been in the category with Aziz Ansari and Chris Hardwick. That's my only real point on Louis C.K.
My whole thing was, did they say yes? Yes. And if they said no, did he do it? No. That's where it ends for me.
Yeah. And so that's always been my question is, what are you suggesting he did something illegal? You know, like unethical as an employer, I'll give you, because there was one account of someone who was working on, I believe it was the Chris Rock show, where he was the head writer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a situation where it's like, hey, you should know that a woman beneath you in the industry is going to feel pressured to say yes to a date. However, that's very easy for us to say in hindsight 25 years later.
Right.
When that's not how society was in the 90s. Like, I'm terribly sorry about it. It sucked for a lot of people, but there's nothing we can do about that now. It's crazy for us to try and go back in time and say this is how you should have behaved in the 90s when no one was holding themselves to that standard.
Exactly.
Anyways, so, you know, people tried to cancel him for the Parkland thing. He basically said, fuck everyone. He has not cared. Now, like I said, he now has directed a movie and co-written a movie with the great Joe List, who I don't know how often I've mentioned him on this podcast, but generally when people say, like, who's a guy I may not have heard of in stand-up that I should check out, my answer is always Joe List first. Like, he put out a very funny special this year, and then he co-wrote a movie with Louis. So Louis started to do podcasts again. I just told you earlier on that he did the President's podcast with Shane.
Mm-hmm.
And then just in the last week or two, he has done Are You Garbage? And he did Ari Shaffir's Skeptic Tank. Now, neither of those has he talked about the incident. Or the incidents, the many incidents. His canceling is basically what I mean. In his specials, he hasn't really addressed it. He addressed it for sure. He talked about it. He talked about losing $36 million in a day, which there was also, he had a movie coming out like that month, or even that, I think it might have been that week that the article came out. He had a movie called I Love You, Daddy coming out, where even people tried to spin this in a way. They're like, oh, it's so creepy. He's making a creepy movie. The movie is about a dad and daughter. His daughter is, an adult now. She's gotten older, which is something Louis was dealing with at the time and still today. And his daughter starts dating a guy who's about Louis' age, and Louis is conflicted with that and has to deal with it. So people tried to gave out that plot and said oh, it's about an older man with a younger woman. And it's like, well, yeah, but Louis is the dad in the movie. Right. Even in writing it, he's coming from the perspective of having teenage daughters. So don't spin it into, oh, he's a pervert. He's leaving breadcrumbs to tell us he's a creep. So there, a lot of weird stuff like that went on. But in Louis' special, he addressed it, but in a funny way. And his first special was called Sincerely. His second special was called Sorry. I have a feeling those weren't coincidences. I have a feeling he called them Sincerely Sorry for a reason. And in the most recent one, he put sorry in giant letters behind him. So essentially, he's addressed it 4 times, let's say, or 3 times, I think, in both specials in his own way, and in the statement that he put out where he apologized, basically.
Right.
But none of these things were good enough for people where they're like, oh, he hasn't talked about it. That talk has died down a little bit. I think with the movie coming out, you might hear more people pipe up. Like if you go look at Rotten Tomatoes reviews, there are people that are criticizing the movie that seem to have a slant on why they're criticizing it. Like the ones who attack Louis, who is in 2 scenes of the movie. They might have an axe to grind. But Basically, what people are criticizing for, which I kind of agree with, is that he has not done a sit-down interview with whoever, whether it's 60 Minutes or Joe Rogan, where it would be probably a friendlier environment.
But why should he have to?
Well, so here's my thing. As a fan of his, I would like him to, because I think he would shed some perspective on it. He's coming from an angle that we haven't heard because we hadn't heard him talk about it. And I do think it would eliminate some of the weirdness where that's how you think of him.
See, like,
you know what I mean? I think it would be a step forward in kind of eliminating that as him addressing.
So like R. Kelly did an interview, but he has been accused of rape.
Much worse.
Louis C.K., who by all accounts never did anything against anyone's will, and they all said yes. And if they said no, he didn't do it, I don't think he doesn't know anyone's shit.
Yeah. So an interesting thing that I found is in a previous article prior to the New York Times story about Louis, an interviewer brought it up to Louis, and Louis's answer was, he goes, that's a lot of gossip, and I don't think addressing that stuff in the press does any good. Which I take that to mean whatever I say, you already have your opinion and you're going to twist it in some direction. So I don't feel comfortable talking about it because no matter what, you're going to think what you think. So I assume, now this is 5 years later and he's been through a lot, but I assume that he still kind of has that stance where he's like, no matter if I do Rogan, they're going to say I pussied out and went on a friend's podcast. If I do 60 Minutes, they're going to take things out of context and spin them the way they want. No matter what he does, it's probably not the best look for him. Now, with time, that might change. Like, to use Shane again, he just did an interview with Andrew Yang. That's about to, probably by the time you're hearing this, has probably already come out. He didn't want to do that 3 years ago because he was like, what good does that do me? They're not going to be like, oh, you know what? Have SNL back. But with time, now that people have kind of forgotten that, it's like, oh, okay, here's his perspective. So in a year or two, Louis might do Rogan or Maron well, he won't do Maron because I've seen Maron's live streams, but someone asked him the other day, are you friends with Louis? He said, no. And then you just moved on.
Really?
Just cut ties with him. Yeah.
I hate Mark Maron too.
Well, he's on. I pity Mark Maron. Like I think he's on the brink of a meltdown of some kind. But
him and Tig Notaro look eerily similar too.
I don't see well. I don't know about that. I also mentioned Louis coming back. So Louis went to France for a good amount of his hiatus, and he came back during the pandemic, or before the pandemic, I assume. And at that time, he was dating someone. He had a girlfriend. He acknowledged it in one of the specials. I think it was the most recent one, that he had just broken up with this woman. But while they were still dating, he put out on his website, like you paid like $10 and you got all 8 or 10 episodes of his podcast that he did. Because it's on a paywall, I don't have the clip, unfortunately. But he was talking about his mother dying. And before his mom died, he talked to his mom about it. And his mom shined like an interesting perspective on it, where she kind of had an open mind about masturbation and everything. So his mom was basically coming from the perspective of like, why are these people giving you such a hard time about it? And Louis in that says like, well, it's more complicated than that. And it was kind of just a throwaway line and they kept going. But it was interesting to hear that little clip because you could tell he was almost arguing with his mom saying like, no, I did some things wrong in this. So we can look at it and say like, he hasn't appeased us by doing an interview. Therefore he hasn't learned, but we don't know the fucking guy. So maybe he has, we really have no idea. And I think he kind of likes keeping that mystery. I also think he likes annoying people by calling his specials sincerely sorry and not actually saying sorry in the specials. I think that's just funny to him.
Yeah, his next one's going to be called To All Women.
I'm serious. But yeah, so then his latest thing, like I said, he directed 4th of July. I thought it was great. Again, a lot of people that criticized the movie were like, it wasn't funny, but it was a drama that him and Joe List made. And to me, it was very relatable. It was about anxiety and dealing with a family that you don't necessarily relate to. And those parents having to deal with a son that they did a lot for, but now they've kind of lost touch with him and he's standoffish and weird. I don't know why I related to it so well after explaining it like that, but for some reason I did. I was able to put myself in Joe List's shoes and see the world through his eyes.
No idea why.
It's very weird. But I thought it was a great movie, and it reminded me of the serious episodes of Louis where you're like, okay, this guy has something to say. It's not the funniest thing in the world, but it comes from an interesting perspective. So if you're able to, it'll be streaming in August at some point, I think. But if you're able to get your mitts on 4th of July, I recommend you go see it. I don't know. Was there anything I missed?
We think we covered it.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe there will be a part 2 of the Louis episode. Who knows what he's got in store for the rest of his career. But I do think it's interesting to do kind of living legends sometimes. Louis is probably the most famous living legend that we'll do. I think the next one we're doing is Ron White, by the way.
Chappelle, probably.
Yeah, but I'll talk about things like we talked about Chappelle leaving Comedy Central and shit like that.
Right. Oh, okay.
But my point is, like living legends, I would rather talk about guys that are underappreciated, like Attell and Colin Quinn. Like I said, I have one planned for Ron White.
I love Ron White.
So we'll do that episode. But with Louis, I thought it was just that like people stop talking about him now. So I do think it's kind of interesting to look back and remember what he was and what everyone once saw in him. And I just think in general, this discussion of what he did is interesting because like I said, I'm sure some people probably got annoyed at what I was saying, but I don't know that I was 100% right. You know what I mean? Like I believe what I believe and you probably won't change a lot of that, but I'm also willing to hear other perspectives, you know, because I think it's an interesting conversation. So
yes,
I hope everyone enjoyed it. I know some matters were a little more serious today than others, but we try to mix in the seriousness with the usual wacky hijinks we provide you. So make sure you go to, if you want to support Craig, you can go to verygoodshow.org. And then this podcast, you can get a week early on blindmike.net. That's where you can find the Patreon, the merch, the links to the podcast. Leave a 5-star review, subscribe on YouTube, give us a like. All of that helps the show. And go check out Vaulted Podcast as well. That's where you usually do the show. It sounds better when we're there. So if you want to record something, check them out in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Anything I'm missing, Craig?
Nope, that is it, sir.
All right, folks, then we will see you next week on Why Are You Laughing?